Welcome to the latest edition of Love Ultras. I'm John Kynaston and this is episode 9. I thought for this episode I would talk about tapering. It's now Monday the 19th of June, so the West Highland Way race is just 5 days away. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm certainly in my tapering period at the moment. So I thought I'd just share some thoughts on how I found over the last 10 years or so of preparing for these ultra races, and what I found helps me and works for me in tapering. Again, I know we're all different and people will have very different tapering, but I'm sure it's basically the same. The idea of having a good block of training and then 2 or 3 weeks before, maybe less for some people, then to taper down, so that the idea of getting to the start line ready to run and feeling refreshed. I remember when I started the ultras, I probably hadn't really done much tapering ever before. I'd only done one marathon when I was in my mid-20s. Most of the races I did were half marathons, 10 milers during this, when I was in my 20s and early 30s. Then we worked overseas for a number of years, and when I came home again I did some half marathons. And I think I can't remember really tapering too much. Maybe the week before, just having an easier week before a half marathon, but it didn't seem as important somehow. But once I got into the ultras and started with the Highland Fling and the West Highland Way in 2007, I realised that you needed to prepare for these. And if you're going to have a block of 12, 16 weeks of training, maybe more, then certainly you needed to have a bit of a taper before. And so I think I just basically had 2 or 3 weeks and I set aside. And I never found it particularly easy, as the majority of runners don't find tapers easy. If you've been running 4 or 5 times a week, as I try to, then suddenly to ease off, I found that quite difficult. I felt sluggish. I felt every little aches and pain was a niggle, was a major injury, and I wondered whether I'd get to the start line. And it starts to play with you mentally. And I think for me the worst thing was just feeling sluggish. I felt as though I was trained hard and I'd worked hard and I'd done some good sessions, and then suddenly you have a couple of weeks where for me I would maybe run every other day, and suddenly every run I just thought, my legs feel heavy and I just don't feel I've got any spring in my legs at all. And you start fearing that you've lost all that fitness that you've gained over the last 2 or 3 months, and the race is going to be a disaster because you stopped running hard too early, and all these things start to plague your mind. And in fact, I remember, I think it was probably the second West Highland Way, when I'd really trained hard and I wanted to go faster than my first year, and I'd put a lot of time and effort into it. And I remember about 2 weeks to go thinking, I'd started the taper and I just felt as though I was just losing all my fitness. And I remember thinking, maybe I need to go for a long run a week before the race to get something back, and otherwise I'm going to lose it all. And Ian Beattie, who's now the West Highland Way race director, a good friend, I remember Ian getting in touch and said, John, just relax. You've done all the work, you need to trust it, and you need it's the same for everybody. Everybody finds this difficult, just trust that you'll be fine. And he was right, and I had a good run, and that worked well. But it's amazing just how that tapering time, it does start to play in your head, and it takes a while to be able to work out what to do. And I think over the years I've worked out what works for me, and a pattern. Now it would depend a little bit on the races that I do. I try and run between 4 and 5 ultras a year. I like to have one longer race. So for this year it's the West Highland Way, even though this year my focus for the second half of the year is the Ring of Fire, and I'll have to think about my taper for that one, because that's going to be over a 3-day event, but I'm sure it'll be quite similar. But for the other ultras, like I did the Highland Fling this year, and I think I did give myself 2 weeks in a similar pattern to what I'm going to explain now for that one. But sometimes I've just had a week, maybe I've maybe done a longer run 2 weeks before the race, and then had an easy week, and then a bit of a run on the Saturday before, maybe even a park run. Sometimes I quite like to do that, a short sharp one, and then the week before just sort of getting ready. But I'm thinking about for this tapering, my plan, if I'm doing my long one of the year. So last year it was the Hardmoors 160. This year it's the West Highland Way. Year before that it was the Lakeland 100. And I would have a similar pattern where I'd have basically a 4-week pattern, which I'll explain how that works for me. But as I said, this is what I've worked out, and it seems to work at the moment, and I'm quite happy with this. And so this is what I'm going to share that I do. And I know different people would have different thoughts, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? But anyway, for me, I like to have 4 weeks before the race to have my last big long run. So if it was the Highland Fling, a month before, I would do the Devil of the Highlands route, which was 40 odd miles. This year I did it slightly differently in that I did it over 2 days, because I wanted to prepare for the Ring of Fire, where I'll be running 2 days, 3 days on the run. So that was slightly different. And for the West Highland Way this year, I did a big weekend 4 weeks before the race. So we're now into the last week, so that was three weekends ago. And I would have done a couple of days on the West Highland Way, but again, because I was preparing for the Ring of Fire in September, I went down to Anglesey and I did 3 days over the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and did just over 70 miles over those 3 days. But that was my last big effort, and that's what I like to do. And then, so that's 4 weeks out, and then the week leading up to 3 weeks out, I would have an easy week. So to recover from that big weekend, so I would probably do 2-3 runs, easy runs off-road, on-road, just to sort of tick over, and maybe only do 15 to 20 miles that week, just to give myself a chance to recover from that big weekend. And then the week leading from 3 weeks out to 2 weeks out, I would do a medium week. So I would plan maybe to do one tempo run. If I've been doing Ben Lomond runs, I'd like to do my last Ben Lomond up and down, and then I would probably do a 11 to 15 mile on the Braes 2 weeks before. So that would be like a medium week. And then the final 2 weeks before the race, that would be my main taper. And I personally just like to run every other day. I know some people just carry on. If you've been running 5 times a week, they carry on running 5 times, but ease off with the intensity. If they were doing tempo runs, instead of doing say 10 by 3, they might only do 6 by 3. But personally, I like to have those 2 weeks before just to run every other day. So if the race is on the Saturday, I would bring it back. I would do my last one on the Wednesday, and then Monday, Sunday, Wednesday, Monday, whatever, and just every other day leading up to the last run being the Wednesday before a Saturday race. So I'd have the last run on the Wednesday, and then I'd have Thursday, Friday off completely, and then like the West Highland Way would start at 1 in the morning on the Saturday. So that would be my pattern. 4 weeks before, to have my last big weekend, have an easy week, then a medium week, and then two easy weeks. And I find that sort of 4 week pattern, I quite like that, because I do that big weekend and then have an easy week, and then it's almost, I find a 4 week taper would be too much for me. I'd find that quite hard if I didn't do another harder session or no main running. So I quite like having that medium week, and then I know I've got then 2 weeks just to taper down. So that's my plan, and I've certainly done that for a lot of the races over the last number of years. But this year it's been a bit different. If you've been following my blog, I've picked up a little bit of a tendon injury on my inside of my right foot, and I've been to see Matt Williamson, who's helped me last Monday, and then I saw him this morning, and he's been really helpful, and just been able to tape it up and give me some exercises and just do a bit of manipulation. And basically it's just the tendon's been sore, to be honest, for the last 2 or 3 months, and it's never been so sore that I felt it was serious. I thought it was going to ease off, and it did ease off and then came back again. But when I did the Mulgai trail race, which was 3 weeks out from the race, it was sore, and I decided, oh, maybe I should just have an easy week, and I did. And then I went for a run. I didn't run at all for 5 days, and then I ran on the Saturday, which was 2 weeks before the race, and it was still quite sore. So I thought, what do I do? The last 2 weeks, do I run every other day, which was my plan, or do I just not run at all for 2 weeks? And I decided to go for the latter. So I'm not going to run at all for 2 weeks before the West Highland Way, which is going to be an interesting experiment for me. But I just thought that would be more sensible. I'd rather get to the start line feeling a little bit undercooked, but the tendon settle down, than trying to run every other day, which wouldn't give much for my fitness, but would mean that there's no way that I would start the race without it being sore. So that was the plan. So I decided one of the things because of that is that mentally it was going to be quite hard. I've never done a taper like this before where I've not run for 2 weeks, and I knew it could easily play in my head. And my friend Marco got in touch actually and was asking how it was going. I explained what I was going to do, and he said just make sure it doesn't play with your head, you don't get negative that you've not run for 2 weeks. And so I've decided to make it a very positive thing. So I'm actually looking forward to the fact that I'm not going to run for 2 weeks, which means that I would never choose to do that. That wouldn't be something I would plan to do, because I just wouldn't plan that. I would always do, as I said, some easy runs the 2 weeks before the race. So I'm looking forward to seeing what difference it makes, and maybe it'll help me. And having 2 weeks off completely will mean that when I get to the start line on 1 o'clock on Saturday morning, I'll be raring to go and looking forward to it and seeing whether all the pain's gone or not. It's certainly getting easier by the day, and so I'm hoping by Friday, Saturday morning, I'm sure it'll still be a little bit sore, but nowhere near what it was 2 weeks ago, and nowhere near what it would have been if I'd run and not rested it. So we'll see. So basically this year is going to be slightly different, and I say it will be an experiment, and I'm looking forward to seeing if it makes any difference at all. People tell me that if you don't run for 2 weeks, you're not going to lose any of that fitness. I'm sure if it was a 10k race or a half marathon, it might be different if you lost a little bit of sharpness. But I think for West Highland Way, where I'm going to be running for over 20 hours, then it's not going to make much difference. My fitness hopefully is good. I've worked hard over the last 4 or 5 months. I've had a good block of training 3 weeks after the fling, so I feel as though I've done the work and I've just got to get on with it now. And it's not going to make much difference, the fact that I've not run for 2 weeks. And as I said, I'm hoping and I'm looking forward to seeing whether it actually makes a positive benefit and it's actually helpful. And if it is, maybe I need to build that into my tapering from now on, that I have a week or 2 weeks of no running at all, and we'll see. So watch this space. So anyway, I was thinking, just to summarize my thoughts, these are my top 3 tips on tapering that I've found over the years that has helped me. And number 1 is trust your training, and I think this is the key one. I said there's been times when I've not done that. I've trained hard up until 2 weeks before, and then I start to second guess myself, and I think, oh, maybe I'm losing my fitness and I just need to put another session in. And it's easy to do that and to actually end up doing more damage, because I think you do need to have that time just to let things settle down, just to allow your body to get ready for what you're going to put it through, of running 95 miles or more, whatever the length of race is. And so I think that first tip is just to trust your training, to recognize that you've put the work in and it is what it is. And if you haven't, and you haven't done the training, then whatever you do in the last 2 weeks is not going to make that much difference anyway. A bit like revising for an exam, isn't it? You know, if you try and cram in the last day or two, the last night or two, it's probably not going to make a great deal of difference, whereas you need to space it out over the time of your revision. And so that's my thought. So number 1 is to trust your training. The second one I've thought about is not do anything silly in the last 2 to 3 weeks. And I suppose that's similar to that first point, because I think you're not going to gain much over that last 2 weeks, whatever you do, but you can ruin your race. You can go out for a session, whether it's a hard run, a tempo run, or a speed session, or go up and down Ben Lomond a few days before the race, and that'll still be in your legs when you come to the race. I remember the year 2010 where I tried to do too many races before the West Highland Way. I did one a month, and I did the Tapering a month before the West Highland Way, and really I should have just trusted that, but I'd always done at least one run in the last month in the pattern that I've been talking about. So I thought, well, I'll still need to do a longer run, but I didn't want to do it the week after the Tapering because that wasn't enough time to recover. So I did it 2 weeks after, which meant it was only 2 weeks before the West Highland Way. So I did the run, and I remember going from, I think it was Balmaha to Rowadennan and back, to Inversnaid and back, so it was sort of 30 miler. And it was just far too much. So my legs were still heavy from the Tapering, and then by the time I got to the start line for the West Highland Way, they were still heavy from that training run. Looking back, if I was going to do the Tapering, I should have just done maybe a 10 miler or an easy 8 miler 2 weeks before, not another 25, 30 miler, which is what I did. And it meant that I came to the start line feeling really heavy, and that really affected my run. I did have a tough run, and I'd beaten 20 hours the 2 years before, but it took me 22:15, and I remember getting to Bridge of Orchy and just really struggling because my legs had been heavy right from the start. So that was one of the big lessons I've learned. Don't do anything silly in those last 2 or 3 weeks. You've got to just trust your training, trust whatever it is, and just get on with it, and allow yourself to be able to run, and try and get to that start line as refreshed as you can. With the podcast that I do with the West Highland Way, this year I've been chatting with Leslie McCarroll, and at the end of each one I ask her, and because I'm doing it this year as well, I've been doing it, is give it a scale of 1 to 10 where we're at. So we started in February at sort of 4 or 5, and each month hopefully that number will increase. And the last one we did a couple of weeks ago, we both said that we were 9.5. I might have to revise that a little bit because of this tendon, but anyway, hopefully I'm still at 9.5, 10 as we get to the start line, because the aim is to get to that start line feeling refreshed as possible. So don't do anything silly in that last 2 to 3 weeks, and just make sure you give that time to allow your body to recover and to be ready for the effort that you're going to put in over the race. And then the final thought is to use the taper time these last couple of weeks to prepare, to be positive and prepare mentally. And I think because you've got a bit less time to run, then you've got a bit more time to be able to do other things. And one of the things I like to do in that last couple of weeks is to really spend time, if it's a new race or a race I don't know so well, go over the route and make sure I'm happy with all the checkpoints are, watch the videos that I might have made about the route. Obviously for the West Highland Way I don't need to do that because I know it well. But what I do like to do is just to read some of my old race reports of how I've got on and what some of the lessons that I learned in running the West Highland Way, and make sure I don't make the same mistakes again. I always like to do on my race reports another post which is lessons learned, and I like to read through those the week before the race just to make sure, oh yeah, I remember that, I made that silly mistake, I did this or I did that. And just to make sure I go into the race feeling as positive as possible, because I've thought about the mistakes I've made and I'm not going to make those mistakes again. Well, that's the theory anyway. And so to use the taper time just to prepare mentally and to go in feeling as positive as possible. So there's my take on tapering. I say this year is going to be quite different because of this tendon soreness, and so it's going to be a little experiment, but my basic pattern is 4 weeks out to do my last big run, whether it's a weekend or a single run, have an easy week, have a medium to hard week where I'll put a couple of some harder sessions in, and then a 2-week taper where I just run every other day. And finally, let me say, anyone who's running the West Highland Way on Saturday, I look forward to being on the start line with you and hopefully running with some of you throughout the day. And I hope you all achieve your goals and have a great race. And I'm certainly looking forward to trying doing that myself.